Good morning, goeiemorgen, and I can't even say Dumela because nobody would understand me down here. But welcome to Nampo Cape and to Nation and Conversation. We had 2 years before COVID changed our lives, so this is the third year we're at Nampo Cape, and very proud and honored to be here. Again, Theo for coming down. Theo had a harrowing experience. He was locked in on the pass coming through from Cape Town Airport, and last night and could only get to bed at 3 o'clock. So, but you're a strong boy, you come from Gauteng. So, welcome. We're looking forward to the conversations we are having this week. Agri is in an interesting space, to say the least. We've had 2 brilliant years and a third coming up. And I'll say this in Afrikaans, 'n wyse ou heer in landbou het vir my gesê boere kan teespoed hanteer, maar hulle weet nie mooi wat om met voorspoed te doen nie. So dit is nogal waar. So this is the time that we should be very careful what we do and how we do it, and make wise decisions. And this platform is to inform us and to help us take decisions, especially about risk. So enjoy the session, Theo, and your panel members, excellent panel members as always, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Francois. And from my side, welcome everybody. Specifically welcome to the people that's in the audience, and then the people watching on the various platforms. You're welcome to view this at a later stage as well. It will be recorded and will be available on the different digital platforms. So welcome to everybody, wherever you are. I think this is an incredibly important topic, and so is the rest of our topics. Just 1 or 2 points. On the web page where you register, there's also a placeholder where you can ask a question to the audience or to the panel. And those questions will be fed to me. So if I look at my cell phone, it is not to see if there's any lucky draws or somewhere inheritance that I got out of Nigeria or something. It is purely just to see if there's questions coming through that is getting fed to me. So you are welcome to send questions, and we will address those questions. And again, Francois, it is great to be back. Just like Nampo and Botawil, Nampo Cape, it is an incredible. I think it is an incredible feeling to again be together, to have these conversations, to have these platforms. Now, the discussion this morning is specifically about infrastructure, and I'm honored to have a great panel. So I will go through the panel and just introduce everybody, and just as part of the conversation. But let me just. For those of you who are not familiar with the people, on my far side is Glenn Steyn. Glenn is Project Manager, Port of Cape Town Logistics Chain. So Glenn, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Next to Glenn is Pieter Taljaard. He's the CEO of Grain SA. Pieter, welcome. And then Dr. Candace Klute. Thank you very much for joining us. He's a Senior Analyst at BFAB and did, with the Cape Town Port, quite a lot of work in the recent days, specifically around the export of wine, so we will talk about that. Heini de Tooy, Vice President, Agri Western Cape, and a farmer in the Ceres district. So Heini, welcome. And right next to me is Mariette Kotzier, Group Operations Manager, Hortgrow. As you can see, we have also, because of the nature of where Nampo Cape is taking place, we have included the industries in this specific agriculture region of South Africa. Again, I think this is part of building a long-term sustainable Nampo in the Western Cape. And I think from my point of view, specifically to Grain SA, I think this is a great initiative the last few years, and I hope that this will be as integral part of the agriculture calendar as Nampo in Botawil.
Thanks, Steve.
I'm going to start with you, Heini. We're talking about this morning about infrastructure and the importance of infrastructure. let's just, your opening remarks on that.
Ja, Theo, thank you very much for the opportunity. En ja, ek gaan nou maar oorslaan Afrikaans toe, want ek wil die infrastruktuur in ons land vergelyk met die ruggraat. En ek gaan nou met Jannie Pitter se kalwersploeg. Ou Jannie is 'n bekende in sportkringe en hy sê die ruggraat van 'n rugbyspan is nommer 2, nommer 8, nommer 9, nommer 10 en nommer 15. Daarna word alles aangebou. Nou, ek verskil 'n bietjie met hom want ek het altyd gedink 'n vaskop voorry man is die belangrikste een. Maar right, ons kan nou daaroor redeneer, maar wat Jannie ook gesê het, die ruggraat van Suid-Afrika is boere en is produsente. Nou daarmee stem ek volkome saam. As ek die ruggraat kan verder vat, ek dink infrastruktuur is die ruggraat van landbou en dan spesifiek padvervoer, spoorwegvervoer, ja, hawens gaan ek vir die mense los wat meer weet. So dit is krities belangrik. Ons en ek gaan nou 'n voorbeeld noem, die produkte wat ingevoer word moet op die plase kom, moet by die produsente kom. Dit wat ons uitvoer moet 'n grondpad of 'n teerpad, nasionaal, provinsiale paai moet by die hawens kom. So ja, dit is krities belangrik. En die voorbeeld wat ek wil noem is dat as jy in 2021 het Suid-Afrika 99 miljard se landbou en landbouverwante produkte ingevoer. Maar die uitvoere was 173 miljard. So as jy dit nasionaal vat, dan vir elke rand wat inkom, gaan na R1.74 uit. Maar as jy primêre landbou vat in die land, die nasionale vlak, vir elke rand wat inkom, gaan na R4.21 uit. Maar as jy dit na die Weskaap toe trek, is dit R13.77 op 'n rand. So dit is
Wat uitgaan.
Ja, R13.77.
So vir elke R1 wat inkom, gaan R13 uit.
77
I'm going to
uit.
pick that up with you, Glenn, just the importance therefore of the logistics chain. But
So dit is, soos ek sê, ek wil nou nie net fokus op pad, vervoer en dit nie, maar die infrastruktuur van paaie, spoorweë en hawens, dis die ruggraat. En ons weet as daar foute is met die ruggraat, dis die lyflamp. En ons ervaar dit, maar nog steeds, ten spyte daarvan, is die Weskaap verantwoordelik vir 55% van nasionale uitvoere. So ten spyte daarvan word daar nog altyd planne gemaak en gaan die produsente nie stil sit nie en ja, die bedrywe en almal. So ja, Theo, die ruggraat in ons land en dink ek is op die stadium daar is 'n paar wêrelds wat nie lekker in plek is nie, maar dis ononderhandelbaar. Dit is vir ons krities belangrik.
Glenn, first of all, Heini, Bierman van Sail coached the Bulls years ago, the Northern Transvaal, and he always said, and I agree with you, the two most important players in a rugby team, according to him, is the tight head prop, and the second most important player is your reserve tight head prop. But Glenn, we talked about the agriculture and the ratio that Heini gave us. It's obviously the Western Cape agriculture is based around the premise that the consumer of the product will be international consumer. Simply, there's not the demand in South Africa to take that up. So therefore, the produce needs the logistics chain to get the produce out of South Africa needs to work. Otherwise, we're going to have a bottleneck, and we're going to have the produce coming back into a too small domestic market. From your point of view, a few comments on that?
Yes, that's absolutely true. So if you look at the profile of Western Cape exports, more than half of it would be table grapes, apples, citrus, and other deciduous, and then obviously wine. So we see it as the three fruit commodities and wine, and we anticipate significant growth in all four of those. In fact, we anticipate the potential for 26% growth in the next 5 years. So
that's volume based.
That's volume based, okay. Yes. So we have a sense that a high growth scenario can be achieved if all stakeholders work together to make it happen. And this high growth scenario is on the basis of incredible stuff, for example, that Hortgrow is doing in improving cultivars, the base work in the rootstock, and the incredible returns that we are getting in terms of fruit production from the same hectares. But be that as it may, our challenge then is to ensure that a logistics chain is calibrated with cargo volumes. So there's a very direct relationship between economic growth and cargo generation and logistics systems. So if for any reason your logistics system is unable to handle the cargo that your growth is generating, then you suffocate your growth. Then the anticipated job creation that is to flow from the growth potential is turned off. So the 26% growth that we see in mainly those 4 commodities, apples, wine, table grapes, and citrus, have the ability to generate 20,000 jobs. And we're even able to quantify what kind of wage amount, remuneration amount is associated with 20,000 jobs, which becomes cash input into the velocity of circulation in an economy, which is essential for economic growth. So the primary focus of our unit in the Department of Economic Development is to work with the major partners to make sure the logistics chains are efficient. And when we say chains are efficient, we mean that at every point in the chain, whether it's the terminal or the cold store or the shipping line depot where the empty containers are held, all those points need to accommodate the cargo volume flows at global best practice times, so that product can leave a pack house and a farm and arrive with a customer in globally competitive times, so that the farmer can receive the full reward, the full value of his product as an incentive to expand his production capacity the next year. That's our basic philosophy.
I'm going to go, perhaps before I go there, there's just, Candace, you did a study specifically around wine. What was the key findings of your study?
So, thanks to you. So, we did work for Glenn and his team to understand that there was first the crisis. So, we had we couldn't export our wine. With COVID, there was a restriction on the transport of alcohol. So our wine couldn't get to the port. And then once that happened, and also we had the local bans on alcohol sales, so we couldn't then sell wine. So our stock levels went up. And once our wine stock levels go up, we need to export more bulk wine in order to get the stock levels down and also to recover prices somewhat. So the work we did for Glenn and his team was to understand the volumes of wine that will go out in the next couple of years, and how does that fit in with the fruit, the expectation on the fruit side, to make sure that is there bottlenecks and can we remove some of the bottlenecks. We know wine is less perishable, but there's still client relationships that needs to be maintained. So can we figure out a way of working together between fruit and wine to make sure that product goes through the port?
Excellent.
And from your point of view, your synopsis of the study, is it something that is workable?
Absolutely. So we were incredibly impressed with Candace and her work, and with Lo. The standard of the work was amazing, and I can certainly recommend BPAP as an institution that understands logistics chains. So I think we've, as a country, reached a point, unfortunately in many ways, Theo, that we may have fell asleep at the job when the world turned towards logistics management. And I'm not sure if we have sufficient depth of skills in understanding those issues. So we are often fairly good at producing. We may even be good at putting a piece of railway line in, but I'm not so sure if we have adequate skills in keeping an entire logistics chain from place of origin to destination, to keep that intact and flowing efficiently. And that's really the challenge that's facing us.
Mariette, I think it's been sketched around the importance of the backbone, of the logistics backbone, but you are specifically involved in these growth that we are talking about. What's your experience? And I want to first start with the last few months. Let's say the last season, and getting closer to what was your experience, and where should the focus be?
Okay, so I think by now there's been a fair amount of coverage in all types of media, from news, newspapers, articles that's been published, etc. So we've not had a great season. And when I say we, I more specifically refer to stone fruit. And the reason for that is, if you look at the growth over the last 5 years within the industry, not even taking into account the growth that's going to occur in the next 5 years, we've grown exponentially in terms of the number of cartons or the number of volumes that's been exported. And that's not just in pome and stone fruit, that is also citrus, table grapes, cherries, and some of the other commodities as well. So I think within the Cape Town port specifically, because about 90% of our produce goes through the Cape Town port, I think that there might have been inefficiencies coming on for quite some time, but the whole situation was exacerbated by the last season, where machinery was down, climatic conditions
Weather played a role.
had a major impact, the efficiencies within the harbour itself, and then linked to us not being able to get our produce out because of some of the markets being closed. So it's not just a South African phenomenon, this is a global phenomenon, and I mean the demand in the rest of the world for shipping was tremendous. So obviously fruit being less lucrative business versus some of the other dry goods. So that had a major impact, and the impact is not necessarily just on the availability of shipping. It has a direct impact in terms of cost. And that's where I wanted to latch on to what Glenn had said. Much of what we focus on is getting our product out, but in the same time we also import a lot of our raw materials, fertilizer, agrochemicals, fuel. And you can think about the compound impact of that back to the grower. And that's the only, well, we have a saying, the product pays at the end of the day. So the only thing that gets to pick up that bill is the producer at the end of the day. And being price takers, we aren't obviously in a position to pass that on to the consumer. So we are actually now in a situation where the sustainability of the export industries is a bit at risk. So we need to turn the ship around. But then again, a feather in the cap to Glenn and some of the other players around the table. We've seen tremendous good cooperation over the last 18 months. I mean, it's not an unwillingness of Transnet and Portnet and all of the players around the table to solve this problem. So there's been weekly meetings, monthly updates. There's been a large amount of planning that's gone into what should we do, how should we prepare for the future. There is short-term, medium-term and long-term plans that's been implemented. Some of it is bringing in additional infrastructure or machinery and equipment. It's looking at process realignment within the port. It's about planning the logistics, making sure that trucks can actually come into the port, deliver. They've gone from, it's always been that way, but we're putting on more emphasis in terms of a 24 service day, so that you can also offload your cargo during night time. Only 2 of the berths were operational this year in Cape Town Harbour. We're expanding, or as a collective, we're looking at increasing that to 3. So there's a lot of stuff that has actually went into preventing a similar situation. So I think from a government, provincial, national, and from the fruit industry side, that is definitely a model of how we can sort of strengthen and leverage off one another to make this scenario work for the future.
I'm going to go to Pieter just now, but Mariette, if I listen to this, are you comfortable that the different role players, and one must be very, a farmer cannot put up a harbour,
No.
neither can a farmer run a railway line or the road for that matter. The question is, does all these role players understand the risk of something major not working as efficiently? Are you comfortable that the will is at all the parties?
Yeah. From my own engagements and involvement, I'm comfortable in terms of a port logistical solution. So I do think that the urgency, the fact that we cannot have another situation, a repeat of this year, I think that's there. Whether in terms of we would be able to influence infrastructure investment and the times linked to that is something different. And I'm not being judgmental about it, but from our own experience, nothing happens fast in a government realm. So from the day that you take a decision till the day that that decision is implemented is a 2-year span. So one also needs to understand that. And I always say, and I might not be popular among growers for saying this, but you know what? Money this previous season would not have solved our problem, because we need to import some of this equipment, and it's not just about getting the stuff here. There's a whole lot of other stuff that also needs to happen. So I'm fairly confident that we have the right people around the table, that there's buy-in from a local and a provincial and a national level. I mean, it's escalated all the way through, and everybody is working very hard to avoid something like this happening. So
that's great news. Pieter, we now talk about the Cape Town Harbour, but there's a bigger infrastructure question around this. Your thoughts?
I feel it's key, and I think for us as organized agriculture, looking specifically at grain, typically we see grain as the value chain or the food value chain that starts to feed the nation. So it's very important, and I think what's key here is economic growth. We need economic growth to employ more people. We need the employment for people to have disposable income to be able to afford the food in the country. So for us, it's very important to be able to be competitive, to supply that grains that's needed, but we do realize that there's a bigger integration. We as organized agriculture that mainly support producers, but also agribusinesses that, again, supply products to producers, it's key that it works, and it's all about our competitiveness. We need this crucial infrastructure to be able to be competitive. And I think that's the bigger picture that we need. In the past, we had conversations about the railway lines and so forth, but those whole skeleton is the thing that we need to be able to run efficiently in order to become competitive.
Glenn, you are at the, you noted the complexity of the logistical chain, and first of all, the fact that there's a lot of players involved in this value chain, but secondly, in the logistics chain, but secondly, there's certain skill sets required in this whole chain. Are we putting enough focus, on the one hand, on all these moving parts, agreeing on the strategy, and secondly, on solving the technical requirements of an efficient value chain?
I don't think we're doing enough. Your question is absolutely valid, but I think some people are not sleeping at night because of those challenges. So, Theo, if you were to just draw on a piece of paper wildly where a situation may begin, and you see something of a Western Cape with its drought challenges of 2016 and 17 and very limited production. And all of a sudden, these good rains, 2018, and towards end of 2019, this production coming off. And even some, in that time, some better rootstock planted. And here the country sits with incredible volumes of cargo that hasn't moved last year. There wasn't cargo to move, and it has to go somewhere. And all the systems to move it are rickety. So 2019, the province got this massive cry for help. the economy is being forced to a standstill because this cargo cannot go through the port. So we created a task team to just work with Transnet, the Ports Authority, and TPT, the ports terminal operator, to make sure that within a terminal the cargo could get onto a ship. I mean, the shipping line has to come into this conversation as well. It's a major agency. And we were able in a short space to bring important role players around the table, understand each other's challenges, find the common space, put short-term interventions in place like the mobile crane that Mariette was talking about in the small terminal, and at least get the 2020 deciduous cargo out despite COVID. We hit the heavy deciduous end of 2021 problem when electricity was shut down, and so many operators took their Christmas leave like everyone else did. So from the beginning of 2022, a whole series of important issues were put in place. Managed to convince Transnet to cancel all operated leave over the Christmas time, because that's when the table grapes want to move. I managed to get 2 critical pieces of equipment in, and we're at a point now where, as Mariette says, we have weekly operational coordination meetings where we can highlight risks, and there's enough trust, because within this type of situation, Transnet is the bigger partner, and they need to be respected as such. All of us are relatively small players. So there's a sense in which the small players should get their house in order, you know, and agree what the priorities are and discuss with almost more of a common focus, rather than everyone try and force his own agenda to one big respondent and get nothing done. So I think there's a whole bunch of institutional dynamics that we may not be clever enough at. And that's the wall we're hitting now, to go to the next level from at least having sorted the terminal out. Vessels berth within 1 day of arrival. Some places in the United States, they sit for 20 days before they can berth. Vessels get turned around in 4 days, including that time waiting at arrival. So we're in very good international practice on the terminal side. Now we're getting to Peter's point to say, but is the railway line linked with the port? Is that functional? And that's a totally different operating division of Transnet we haven't been speaking to before. So the model we've built to sort out the nexus in the port is now the model we need to look at the bigger value chain from origin to destination. And the model that we use to get collaboration going is the model we need to bring all those other parties in, starting from the producer, the local municipality, the producer organization, the district municipality, the province, the national government. There's not a good pattern of collaboration there. So part of solving the problem is the orthopedic stuff, like you said, sir, of getting the backbone in place, but also the softer surgical stuff of making this body functional. The nerves must work, the arteries must work, the connections in every elbow must work, and even the mindset must be positive and constructive. So I think that's the point we're at now.
And with that, it comes back to that little 5-letter word, trust. If trust between the parties are not there, this whole thing falls flat. But Heini, we're now talking about the fact that it seems, from what I can understand, that 2 years ago and last year was a massive wake-up call. And it brought together some parties that were not always talking to one another. There is also examples of where it's been successful. And here I'm referring specifically to, on the one hand, the government side, infrastructure, and the private sector. There is areas where it's successful.
Theo, ja, ek dink daar's 'n reeds verwys, en Mariette het ook net al gesê van die samewerking wat daar is. En ek dink as ons Weskaap praat, as ons georganiseerde landbou praat, is ons baie bevoorreg om met ons departement van landbou en dan ons minister Dr. Ivan Meyer baie goeie verhoudings te hê. En waar daar regtig soos Agri Weskaap wil ook deel wees van 'n oplossing. Daar is probleme, maar gaan ons nou sit en kla heeltyd of gaan ons iets doen? So ons is baie bevoorreg in die Weskaap om daai goeie verhoudings te hê. Ons premier Ellen Windy het so 'n paar weke terug gesê hy beplan om April volgende jaar 'n portefeulje te skep binne sy provinsiale regering van infrastruktuur. Nou dis waar ons nou praat en dis vir ons ook krities belangrik. So daar is goed aan die gebeur. So ja, definitief en wel georganiseerde landbou en dan by name Agri Weskaap was so 2 weke terug genooi deur die Kaapse Besigheidskamer. En daar was 30 industrieë rondom die tafel wat 'n netwerk vorm om oplossings te kry vir die probleme. So ja, daar is regtig goed aan die gebeur. 'n Klein voorbeeldjie wat ek wil noem is as ons nou hernubare energie praat, die mense wat die wind en die sonplase opsit, is 'n area wat hulle verniet mediese 'n mobiele kliniek gegee het wat gratis is vir plaaswerkers. So die goed is aan die gebeur. Maar as ons die privaat sektor nie betrokke is nie, dan ons kan nie 2 jaar wag om oplossings te kry.
What for me was very interesting that I did not know is that there is a private railway company running from the Ceres area to the harbour. There is actually, we all talk about private trains on private infrastructure, but there is in effect agriculture, private sector trains running in Ceres. Just explain how that works.
Ek dink dit is nog nie so groot nie, maar as dit nie vir die privaat sektor was nie, sou hulle nie die spoorlyn weer op standaard kry nie en om die containers te laai en af te laai nie. So ja, ek dink met die druk op padverkeer is dit ook krities belangrik dat ons na die spoorweë kyk. Dit is een deel van die ruggraat.
Ja, ek wil eintlik sommer net gou by Heinie inskakel. Ek bedoel ons kry toenemende druk en ons as verantwoordelike landbouers, ek sluit myself nou daarbey in, wil definitief groener wees. So ons probeer ook ons koolstofvoetspoor binne in die landbousektor af te bestuur. En om weg te beweeg van padvervoer na byvoorbeeld spoorweg is definitief 'n stap in die regte rigting. En ons almal is tog bewus van die carbon tax en daai tipe goederes wat ook in die nabye toekoms 'n rol gaan speel. Maar boonbehalwe spoorweë en hawens sit ons met 'n ander groot tamaletjie en dit is elektrisiteit.
Ja.
Ek bedoel ek en Candace het vroeër gepraat daaroor, maar dit is net so groot soos enige van die ander probleme waarmee ons sit. En as jy kyk na die kapitaalinvestering wat nodig is van die privaat sektor, net om sê nou maar in sonkrag of in wind of in een of ander vorm van hernubare krag te investeer, omdat daar net nie genoeg is nie. So ja, dit is ook 'n uitdaging wat 'n mens nie uit die oog uit moet verloor nie. Maar weer eens wil ek aansluit by wat Hani gesê het. Ek voel in die Weskaap het ons baie goeie samewerking met die verskillende regeringsdepartemente en die inisiatiewe wat daar is ook van die stad Kaapstad om byvoorbeeld krag aan te koop by enige iemand wat addisionele krag kan opwek, net of om verligting te bring op die nasionale toevoer. So ja, ek het gister was ek toevallig by 'n pakhuis gewees en ons het 'n baie interessante gesprek gehad en dit gee eintlik vir mense baie goeie perspektief. Vir elke bin appels en pere wat gepluk word of moet hulle ten minste R3000 investeer in terme van infrastruktuur om daai produk dan nou nadat dit geoes is, deur die ketting te kry en by die mark uit te kry. So dit is enorme beleggings wat nodig gaan wees.
Peter, clearly there's, if we talk infrastructure, it is critically important for agriculture as a whole that we have a working infrastructure, but government is constrained in terms of capital, in terms of maintenance, in terms of capital expenditure. Where do you see the role of business, and I'm talking on two lines here, organized agriculture and commercial agriculture and the various state responsibilities. How do you fit that puzzle?
Yeah, so, Theo, I think the key thing is what we hear this today is the holistic approach that we need to infrastructure. I mean, we can't look at any individual thing in isolation. We need the whole system to run. And that's coming back to the economic growth. That's what we need here. We are talking about the investment. Let me just use an example. In the Western Cape, in many on a grain farm, you need typically around 100,000 rand to produce 1 hectare efficiently. That's capital investment in terms of the land, the machinery, and just the infrastructure that you need on farm. So it's a huge capital investment, not even talking about these higher value crops in terms of fruit and so forth that farmers are vested in this. So business has a big vested interest in this and really willing to support and make sure that the infrastructure and the rest of the systems work. But it was said earlier also today that there's actually 2 parties that pay the price for this. It's the consumer on the one hand and the producer on the other hand. So those two are getting the short end of the stick, and that's why we need this investment. So the key thing what we need this enabling environment to function, but typically your policies are in between. And the quest is how are we as organized agriculture, organized business and commercial business, how are we able to influence this policy environment to be able to get to a point where we can legally assist, legally help, move those stumble blocks out of the way in order to get the chain running and get it to do. So I think that's what business is saying, and organized agriculture is saying, let's help you government and let's just make things efficient in order to become competitive in this country.
What for me was great news was, Glenn, when you said that you believe there's a model. There's a model that is starting to work that can be rolled out. Candace, I want to come back to you. Your view on a model that can work. From your experience in the study you did in the wine industry.
Yeah, I think from a broader fruit perspective, I think with, for example, the fruit industry value chain roundtable, I think the fruit industry, given that it's so export orientated, has been in this process of really getting all the parties together for a long time already. It was just the question was different, and so the parties now was a different set of people in terms of the port specifically. So I think for us as a research house, it's potentially to our motto is data-driven insight. So for us, it's so important to get the real core issues on the table and to analyze and to provide government and industry with the right information. Because if we don't work from the right basis, we're not going to get anywhere. I think an example for me is, even if we compare ports in South Africa with each other, we're still in the 3rd percentile in terms of the global port container index. So, I mean, yes, Cape Town might be better than Durban, but we're all poor. So at least Los Angeles and Long Beach was worse off last year. But I mean, other than that, it's so important that we really, as Glenn said, that we get to international competitiveness and to do that using really solid basis of information.
I've got a nice question coming through on one of the question platforms. And it's a question from a Gideon Karinus. And his question is not specifically ports, but I want you to listen to the question that he put, because I think there's some interesting elements there. He said, what will the possibilities be to form a public-private partnership with users of the road? But then he goes on to say, specifically the gravel roads in the rural areas. What is the possibility to almost get private sector involved to assist government with maintaining those roads on the rural infrastructure? I'm going to start with you from an organized agriculture point and linking it to the fact that there seems to be a lot more discussion around solutions between the private sector and the public sector, private-public partnerships. What would be your view on those kind of role players getting involved?
So, Theo, I think we need to focus as a country more on the positive things. There's a lot of positive things happening, and on that question, yes, it's possible, and we have seen it in the central part or the western part of of South Africa. We also, in February, we had a lot of rain, and those roads were really, especially your gravel roads, where a lot of grain had to be exported to get to the silos, was in a really dire straight condition. And two of the local agricultural input companies, Senwes and NWK, went to government, and they got the agreement in no time, like within 1 week, got the permission to get access to that roads and get the waiver in place, if I can say it that way, to really repair that. So we are seeing those things happening. I think that's what we're talking about. We just need to get this more formalized so that we can help and basically leverage the state resources there. And that's why I'm saying the business producers are vested. They are vested with their interest there, and they are willing to cooperate. And so, yeah, I think it's totally possible, and get more of these private rail companies running, and just reduce the cost for our consumers at the end of the day.
Theo, for me would be, is the budget in terms of preparing or maintaining that infrastructure coming with a waiver? So, I mean, we all pay taxes already. According to me, producers can't afford to take on any more additional responsibility, and not that they're not willing or they don't have the machinery. I mean, it's just a little matter of money. So who is at the end of the day going to pick up the tab for that? So I think we've seen public sector participation in many aspects, but at the end of the day, the responsibility in terms of maintaining certain key infrastructure is a government responsibility. A formalization or a MOU, surely that can work, but it needs to be linked to the funding that has to go with that. Producers can't pay for that.
Yeah, I think there's two sides. There's solving immediate crisis problems, and then longer term having the right things in place. I think this is not only agriculture sector. This is a debate in some of the mining sectors as well, that if you slowly take over responsibility for the school and the clinic and the road, at some point in time, that responsibility is not, the community starts to rely on that, government starts to rely on that. And then you start to get into a gray area as to what do you do in terms of the permanent nature of that relationship. It cannot work. The question, I'm going to come back to the question of trust and the public-private partnership as part of the solution. Am I right, Glenn? Is there, from your point of view, and I understand this is a very difficult question to answer in an open environment where a lot of this content will go out on social media, so one must just be very careful. But is there a understanding from government that the private sector relies on government, but the private sector is willing to assist with solutions? Is there a mind shift, or is there a bit of a structural issue in terms of ideology?
I think in the Western Cape, that certainly is the position, and it's a published position that government would support the private sector to establish its purpose. It will remove the binding constraints. It will make it as easy as possible for business to do business. It may not yet be so in the rest of the country, although from the policy papers that come from the presidency and from Operation Vulindlela, one is getting the impression that there's more of an appetite for private sector participation. And the way Peter said now that within a week they got a response, 2 years ago they would not have got that response. So there certainly is momentum in this direction. So I agree with you, too. That is a brilliant question, and I think the way it was framed, starting with private sector participation, was the right way. The word not to use is privatization, because that kind of
No, the P word is, we're not going to talk about the P word. That's not, we don't talk about the P word.
P is P, and then to Mariette's point, the first step would be some sort of a concept study. You won't immediately go and expend capital and wonder who's going to pay for it. And then once the concept study is floated and accepted, you would have a pilot project. And once the pilot project proves itself, you'll modify it and expand it. And in the process, the roles and responsibilities will become clearer. And I mean, you might even find that you now no longer need as many public works people in a municipality because there is this special purpose vehicle doing the rural roads in a particular area. Just what I've seen is that such an intervention requires specialist organizational project management. You cannot just expect the farmers to go and fix the road. They would have to, farmers will need to, even their organizations will need to continue farming. So the model, I would imagine, would want to look at how a particular group of farmers would procure expert road construction services, and what financial modeling would be built around that to reward those who invest it. And the entire economy will benefit because that's where jobs will be created. That's where logistics channels and chains will be opened for cargo to move fluidly. So that is a win-win situation. May I have 1 more minute?
Yes, certainly.
Because I was just thinking, you know, your question about the private sector investment in infrastructure would make sense at so many levels. It could start at a simple level like rooftop solar panels that are not that expensive. And if 1,000 farmers do that, the total impact on the grid would be significant. And from there, it can move to various forms of infrastructure investment. The ultimate form is the concession of an entire railway line or a corridor, which is beginning to happen.
Yes.
And ultimately, even an entire port, which is now happening in Durban and Kucha, and we're hoping it's going to spread. And what's happening in Maputo, with Dubai ports having received that concession, I think is making many eyes sit and look and take note, because there's a sense in which the small Maputo port is stealing the breakfast of many other ports in the Southern Africa environment because of its efficiency. And it has, Dubai ports, brought their own capital.
I want to touch on that point. I was surprised to see the list of companies wanting to get involved in managing, in the long-term management of the Durban container port. For me, it was incredible to see that it was the who's who of international port management companies, which shows you that there is an appetite for what needs to be done and to do it in a professional, efficient way. The Dubai running the port in Maputo, will that be specifically, I'm talking about the Lowveld area, will that be a direct challenge to the Durban port?
So as we have now, interesting, I don't want to take too much time, all the Zimbabwe citrus, all the Limpopo citrus, all the Mpumalanga citrus has traditionally been exported via Durban. Now with a functional Dubai port, the land logistics part of that cargo movement has essentially been halved. And the vessel turnaround time in Maputo and the vessel service to the markets for that citrus is like clockwork. So what you are finding is that chunk of exports that normally would have gone to Durban is now going via Maputo.
And especially for certain markets.
Yeah.
I mean, the Maputo market is, Maputo port is ideally suited for the eastern markets, Middle East, Far
Middle
East.
East.
Straight line to the Middle
Yep.
East.
And the other thing is the cost to the producer. So we sit in the Sundays River, for example, to go to Kucha. It's around R2 a carton to get your citrus there. If you're up in Limpopo, Tsanin area, down to Durban, that's R15 a carton. If you can go to Maputo, that'll reduce the cost significantly, especially for that Nelspruit area from there. So, I mean, if you can give a citrus producer today R10 in his pocket for every carton that goes out just because he's using a different port, I mean, that's going to make a hell of a difference to his profitability at this point.
All right, we about 50 minutes into the discussion. At this point in time, is there any specific questions? Anybody has a question, a specific question to somebody specific? Francois, and then, and perhaps you can also just quickly, before you give the question, just explain how Senves, which was noted, managed the road challenges around the rainy season, when we had the rains in your area.
So what we did is Senves invested in the equipment and the capacity of the staff and the housing of the staff, and the farmers assisted us with the running cost. So yes, you can
meaning the diesel.
Yeah, you can wait for government, but unfortunately your product doesn't wait. So you have to solve something. Eventually, we hope that there'll be a longer term solution, but in the meantime, farmers have to live. They have to get their product there. So the immediate thing was to get it off, and that's what we did. Theo, I just want to put another perspective on the whole logistics thing, and thank you. You have a very knowledgeable panel. It was a highly interesting and topical matter. To be price competitive in the international markets, I mean, price and quality has to be at that level, otherwise they will not buy from you.
Yes.
Now you can achieve that through efficiency through the whole chain, or, and that's the sad part of it, the buyer will just push back a lower price. And it ends up, and that's the tragedy of what's happening. It's not because of a lack of efficiency at production level. If you look at our price competitiveness at farm gate level, we're at world standard. But as soon, and I take, Peter will confirm that, as soon as you're on an international harbor, the price is $10 to $15 per ton lower. Now, who takes up that punt? Who takes up that leakage? It's pushed back to farmer level. That's exactly, if you tally the cost of not being efficient in our logistics, that's it. Take that $10 to $15, multiply it we've exported 3.5 million tons of grain this year. That's the bill that gets picked up.
Anybody comment?
Yeah, a few thanks. I think the key thing is currently, if you look at grains, for example, let's take wheat, which we are close to harvest the next season. The current prices on the market is about 1,000 rand a ton less than the import parity for wheat. So the South African farmers are getting a much lower price. But on the food inflation side, the consumers are not paying that one. So I think these are the inefficiencies that we are talking about that we can bring back to both sides. As I said earlier, the farmers on the one hand, the consumers on the one. So those efficiencies are crucial because we, as citizens of this country, are paying the price for that. So it's very important that we get this infrastructure chain efficient.
Is there any other questions? Thanks. I'm going to take that point and just elaborate a bit on it. Is there any other questions? From your point of view, we know the inefficient value chain has a cost friction involved in that value chain. And we come through a period where the value chain was not only problematic in terms of cost, it was problematic in terms of moving goods in the value chain. Are you optimistic that having the crisis year or two, given what Len was saying about a model, the discussion points, are you optimistic that specifically from a Western Cape fruit point of view, if you're going to produce in the next 4 years 26% more, that is a quarter of the product more. So is the rest of the world, which comes back to Francois' point about cost.
Yeah.
Cost and efficiency comes into play. Are you comfortable that, first of all, it's being prioritized by all the parties, but secondly, that this bottleneck is not going to catch the industry off guard again?
Well, Theo,
It's a long question.
I wish I could look into a crystal ball and see that there would be no more issues in the near future. But one also have to be realistic. I've made mention about turnaround times, and these things unfortunately don't happen overnight. So from my particular point of view, I think we're still going to have about a rough 18 months ahead of us. But planning is key, and I think that there's enough emphasis and focus in terms of getting that right to try and minimize unnecessary lengthy turnaround times and things like that. When we speak about priority, I was just listening to all of the speakers around the table, and policy being prioritized. Everybody knows about the agricultural agro master plan.
Yes.
That was recently signed by the majority of the industries and various other partners. And if you look at the core within the agricultural agro master plan, I mean, addressing the inefficiencies, getting the competitiveness, sustainability right, or improving on that, looking at the ports, logistics, the end-to-end supply chain, basically. And if you look at the core thread throughout that whole document is basically public-private partnership or public sector participation. So whether a similar situation will be avoided, I can't say, but I'm hopeful. If I look at what has already happened over a short space of time, I'm optimistic regarding the season that we're heading into. I think there's also a mind shift that basically happened on a farm level, because we were so production orientated that we kept on pushing. But given the situation that we're sitting with right now, you can't afford to do that. So you need to be more market orientated. So you need to go back with your entire supply chain and make sure that you plan according to what the market wants, making sure that you get the right quality product in the market at the end of the day, so that you don't erode any price any further. So planning and a mind shift is going to be critical in the near future. We just cannot, and when I say we, pome and stone fruit growers cannot afford another season like we've had this year. And on the positive side, we've already seen some of the logistical costs, and especially shipping rates decreasing slightly. So some of that will also start to alleviate some of the pressure back to a grower level. But then on the other hand, as the rand weakened against the major currencies again, our imports of raw materials become a little bit more expensive, although we might earn a little bit more for our product at the end of the day. So it's really a catch-22 situation, but we need to change our mind shift and the way that we've been doing things as well. We need to be more market orientated. By a production pushing system, we're not going to yield the returns which is required. So yeah, that's...
Mariette noted the agriculture master plan, and both Agri Western Cape and Grain SA are part of the organized agriculture, trying to find, let's say, common goals and common strategies and make everybody win. Heini, from your point of view, the master plan was signed a few months ago. At that point in time, some of the criticism was around, what about the implementation now? We need to move forward. And I'm going to ask Candace you the same question again about the implementation of the next steps, because BFAB was heavily involved in the research on that. So in terms of the master plan, is a great document. Unfortunately, South Africa has a history of producing great documents and not necessarily implementing those magic documents. Heini, from your point of view, what's your experience, what's your view?
Ek wil die voorbeeld van Senwes, ek dink om in die paaie wat François genoem het, is die wil by ons primêre produsent is daar om saam te werk. Terug na die vertroue wat jy net nou genoem het. So om dit te implementeer gaan die is die uitdaging. Maar ja, ek dink van die primêre produsent is dit daar. Die tegnologie en die boerderypraktyke wat verbeter het oor die laaste paar jaar om ons hulpbronne, die mense, die grond en die water beter aan te wend, maak dat ons meer produseer, kan ek maar sê beter boer, want daar is nie plek vir foute nie. die oom het 100 jaar oud geraak, toe hou 'n jong journalisie moet hom 'n onderhoud. Toe sê hy ouma, jy boer nou al 80 jaar, watter was jou beste jaar? Hy het so gedink, toe sê hy broertjie volgende jaar. So ons is ja, die nou, planne moet ons maak, ons moet aangaan. So ja, ek dink dit was die wilsverbintenis wat gemaak is of commitment van georganiseerde landbou dat die implementering van daai plan moet werk. En ek wil nie terugverwys na net wat ek gesê het nie, maar die netwerk wat ons vorm met die Kaapse Besigheidskamer, die primêr is om die ekonomie te groei. En ek dink dis in die land ook van toepassing. So ja.
Your point of view?
Yeah, I feel definitely. I think the plan was signed, and definitely it was said many times that we will never arrive, or most likely never arrive at the perfect plan, but at least there's some agreement. And I think what we are saying is business and the private sector are moving forward. We are implementing, the things are happening, and I think those are the positive things that we just need to continue to build up. Yes, the wheels at government, we all know, turn slow. Clearly, personally, I've seen that we are really in, again, an election stage for 24. A lot of different focus from government, but we are working close with the department, with the DG, with all the different departments, really to focus on getting these projects off the ground and get them running. And as Francois said, we just need to do it. We can't wait another season. We can't wait another month to do it. We are continuing. So I think that's the benefit of having the plan. There is agreement, and yes, there's still some things that we need to fine-tune, but we need to get the implementation going and running with it.
Candace?
Yeah, I think I wasn't involved in the chicken master plan, but my understanding is that one, it got signed off prior to the bigger one and got implemented. So I think from a implementation perspective, there's work now being done in the livestock industry to get that export-orientated strategy documented and to make sure that the industry can get all the ducks in the row. So, for example, something that we have had in the fruit industry forever is your traceability. And I think with the master plan now, there's this opportunity for some of the industries that hasn't worked together previously. The field crops and the livestock are learning from the fruit industry, getting the right people around the table, getting those traceability structures in place. So I think there's great opportunity beyond the fruit industry to really have a more export-orientated focus, because I think that's the only way that we're going to grow our agricultural economy. We don't have the consumer base in South Africa to sufficiently grow our agriculture.
I'm going to ask Glenn the last question, and I'm going to give you the question now, and then I'll take. I'm going to ask if there's any questions, but let me pre-warn you. The question, Glenn, is around the. You talked about. You believe that there is a model that might be rolled out. That is something that we're making progress on. So if you were to provide advice in terms of your experience with the logistics chain specifically around fruit and the Western Cape, and that the elements that make that work for other industries, and perhaps not only port industries, but other logistic industries with challenges, what are the key components? But before I get to that, any other questions? Yes.
Thank you for you. So, I mean, having a Dubai port type company investing as it did in Maputo would be great. But my first question is, what are the chances of something like that happening for the focus of improving our port efficiency? And then the second question would be, which other areas of foreign investment, in which areas can foreign investors invest in specifically to improve port efficiency?
Okay, I'm going to take a stab at answering part of that, and correct me where I get it wrong. Two ports in South Africa, but the most important one is Durban Port, put out a multi-decade tender.
25 years.
25 years. For international port operating companies to take over the management of the container port. And what was for me very impressive is the people that showed proper interest. It was it was probably all the international port agents, operating companies from the east to the west, north, south, everybody participated in the process. Even some of our big local, Remgro was one of the companies that put in a bid. And for me, the feedback from the investor side was the terms are of such a nature that they are happy to negotiate and see if they can do a transaction. So that process is running. And that process might find a great blueprint as to what can be done. And there was different models looking at it, some with investment, some with specific dividend profiles. There was a whole list of things. The second point is, as we speak now, in these days, there are private rail operators being adjudicated to run private trains on our big rail infrastructure. If you look at the line, the East London line to the East London Harbour, apparently it is running at about 5% capacity. So there's 95% available to get it working. And the studies that I have seen is that most of our lines are in great condition to move freight. Not necessarily passengers, but great condition to move freight. So there are these elements by government, and I think you can take it back. My view is to the President's State of the Nation address. He clearly changed the narrative around the private sector and the public sector and responsibilities. And the Minister of Finance, I hope he'll still be the Minister of Finance on the 26th of October when he gives the medium-term budget. But the Minister of Finance emphasized a lot of those elements. So I do think that space is being created. Obviously, like with everything, it takes a lot longer. But we do have private railway private operational railway lines. Omnia's got private stock. Sasol's got private stock. The Ceres Fruit Company has got private stock running from the Ceres. So, in principle, we are moving in that direction. I'm not sure, Glenn, did I get most of that right?
Yeah, and then of course you can add the rails that are being concessioned now, and the tenders are open until I think another 2 months.
So there are serious change of heart in terms of that process.
Yeah.
And obviously, as Maputo will put pressure on Durban to increase their efficiencies, Cape Town, all these harbours will start to be challenged like any competitive environment. It's great for everybody.
Exactly.
Everything gets done in a better way. Any other, great question, thank you. Any other question? Yes.
Thank you. I visited northern Cape Town last year. There was a lot spoken about farmers getting involved in sectors outside of farming. And what I've seen there is one of the farmers actually managed to get a high-profile job on the municipality because of their involvement in the politics. And that is also one way to look at it, of how farmers are getting involved in community kind of projects, removing the refuge and playing that kind of role. And some of them getting involved in politics, and now they getting these positions in the local municipalities where they can be more efficient and effective for the communities there.
Certainly, and I think there is some great examples, again in the Western Cape, where farmers got involved in the local elections and take the point of view that we cannot continue criticizing. We need to get our views across and we need to assist. But that's part and parcel of a process that needs trust as the underlying principle. But a great point. Yes, a great point. Thank you. So I'm going to, is there a last question? I'm going to end off with a question that I want to put to you, Glenn. The principle of having a kind of a model that takes a massive challenge with multiple role players. That's easier said than done. What is required for that to work and to be able to be modeled for other challenges?
So at the top level, I would say there are 4 stages in the model, but would you mind if I just spent half a minute? I think your question was so important, so that point on the costing up to the pack house, and then up to the point of destination. I just wanted to make two comments on it, and I think I just wish there were more conversations of that nature. And I believe it's true. The efficiencies on the farm and up to the pack house are exemplary. I think it's world class. It seems to me that the rest of the cost structure would probably be 70 order of magnitude influenced by global shipping networks and inefficiencies and waiting at ports. So the vessel coming to pick up our grain or bring in our grain or take out our fruit is arriving a week late, or often has to skip Cape Town altogether and only come back on a return leg. So our focus is then becoming, how do we first sort out the 30% internally, which I think is very much, very close to sorted out with a few to go, and then see what influence we can exert on the 70%, although, as Mariette says, the first signs of the 70% normalizing are beginning to show. So we are cautiously optimistic that that potential high growth scenario is within our reach. Obviously, when you said, can that reoccur? Yes, it can recur. There is a potential to slide down to the low growth situation. And that is my link, I think, to my reply to you of the model. It's going to require contribution from everyone, almost like that wall that had to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. Everyone had to just build in front of his own house. It has to, all stakeholders will need to join the action to repair the logistics chain, whether it's a freight forwarder or a producer or a transporter, shipping line. So the 4 stages in the process, I think Heine made a critical point. He said political will. That to me is point 1. There has to be motivation. There has to be support. So a premier or a minister would need to deploy a project manager and go public and announce and say, this is critical for us. We stand with our farmers. From there, you would need to start building the trust among all the major agencies in the line. And some of those major agencies are going to be prima inter pares. They're going to be used to doing things on their own. They might not like being called by what they may consider a lesser institution. They might not like being called to account. So they will need it's going to need a particular kind of person who can go into a traditional situation and very gently disrupt the power structures and recreate communication and trust and agree. That's the second step. Third step, agree on critical interventions. And those interventions are often going to be spatially focused, like in this case on the container terminals. Then you would need to call in backup people like Candace, all your research organizations, preferably who are focused on that logistics chain you are working for. And you need to get the technical input to make sure you address the right root causes. As you gain momentum and your trust grows and positivity emanates, you are then ready to step back for your 4th step and look at your supply chain in its bigger sense and make sure the hinterland is connected, the railway connections, from farm to fork, as they say, right up to the destination. And then there will be a few role players, like the shipping lines, in our case, that you would then bring in who may not have been part of the conversation. So those 4 steps, I believe, are the essence of the model. They'll vary from time to time. You need the political will. You need to start building collaboration. You need to take the first critical action out of the collaboration, and that action must be evidence-based. And then you extend your action to the entire logistics chain. So, Theo, I think that's kind of...
I think that's a much more thorough answer than I was expecting. Thank you very much. That's a brilliant answer, and I think that gives, not only from a project management, from a thought process, it gives a nice framework to work from. Thank you very much, Glenn. Is there any other questions for the last time? 4, 3, 2, 1. Then I would like to thank my panel. I think it was a great discussion. Everybody, thank you for your participation. And from the audience side, specifically coming into the audience, thank you very much. And all those watching on the various digital platforms, you can rerun this. It will be, portions of it will go out in various formats, because I do think this is an important discussion, and what gives me confidence is there is certainly a mind change in terms of finding solutions and parties participating in finding the solutions. And perhaps we always talk about the mind shift change from government. Perhaps there's a mind shift change required from producers as well. And perhaps there's a mind shift change required from everybody being an active citizen in creating these changes, as you were noting in terms of getting involved in various elements. So from my point of view, just 1 or 2 points. If you register, you are welcome to send us questions. I will put the questions to the panel. We might not answer all the questions, we might not get to every question, but I hope to see you in the rest of these days. And again, it is great to be back at Nampo Cape, and I wish that this will become part of the calendar as much as Nampo is part of the calendar in Bothaville. Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience.